Welcome to Fearfully Made the podcast. We're so glad you're here. Today, we are going to jump into functions of behavior.
Awesome. I'm ready.
Love it. I'm Marissa.
And I'm Kim.
And we are Fearfully Made the
Fearfully Made
podcast. All right. Are you ready for this one?
Yeah.
Functions of behavior is kind of hard.
What'd you say?
I said functions of behavior is like really hard, actually. I feel like it's something that I still kind of sometimes struggle with.
I think a lot of people struggle with it. It requires a lot of thought process.
Yeah. So let's talk about what functions of behavior are. There are 4 functions. I'll let you start, Kim.
Yes. So Marissa had brought up a good point. ABA always talks about acronyms. So
We do.
SEAT is an easy way to remember this. So S is sensory, E is escape, A is attention, and T is tangible. Sensory is requiring all of your 5 senses. Escape is what we like to call task avoidance. Attention is seeking either positive or negative attention. And then tangible is seeking access to a desired activity, location, person, an object. Do we want to dive into each function of behavior and talk about specific examples on how to identify?
Sure, I would love to. Let's start with, since we gave the C acronym, we'll start with sensory. So like you said, it's your 5 senses. So let's go over them. What would sight look like if I was trying to identify sight?
Yes, so that could also be recognized as visual stereotypy. And a lot of kids do different things, whether it's looking at fans or lights or wheels turning. I had a client whose parent would tell me that it was really hard to take their kid out in public because he would always have his head turned like this and be looking at the wheels and then not realize where he's walking in front. Or like where his steps were taking him. So sometimes he'd end up like hitting himself against another person, a tree, just something where he wasn't paying attention because he was visually stimming on wheels that were moving.
Absolutely. Let's go into hearing.
Hearing. Okay, so we like to call this audio stereotypy, where it could be hearing a segment on YouTube over and over and over again, and then they keep the little volume as close to their ear as possible. And then sometimes they'll even engage in some sort of like physical stereotypy where they're like jumping up and down or making some sort of vocal noises in their throat and then projecting it out while they're listening to that audio stereotypy or that hearing.
Yeah, I used to have a client, sweetest kid ever, but anytime I would talk, he would like want to put his ear like right up against my mouth. Like he loved like just the vibration that was coming from the sound coming out of my mouth. He loved that. Let's talk about taste.
Yes. So there's a lot of kids with oral fixation, and that could include different foods and that can include different objects. So if you notice your child is putting things in their mouth that are inedible, that is typically a oral fixation. Like I had a client who would discover new toys or discover new objects, and her initial instinct was to lick it. So I always knew that, oh, maybe like instead of her touch senses being hyper, it's actually her oral that's hyper. And so in order for her to feel something, she had to lick it. Yeah.
Yeah. This is also where pica comes in.
Yes.
And I want to say, because I've read a lot of different people talking about this lately, asking questions about, hey, like my kid ingests things that are not supposed to be ingested. When it comes to anything with like the oral fixation, if they are ingesting things, you need to talk to a pediatrician about that. Make sure
Yeah,
that you're like
immediately.
having that conversation. Don't just assume like, oh, my kid has pica or my kid, whatever. It's really important for that particular thing because it it can be tricky for parents. It could be like a vitamin deficiency, right? Where you can work with a doctor and they can get some vitamins and take care of that. And then some of it's just like they need oral stimulation. They might need a chewy. They, like you said, your client like to lick things and that's how she experienced them in the world. So it can be
Yes.
many different things. But I would say with oral fixation, especially, it's really important that you're talking with your pediatrician about this and making sure. It's very hard to keep our kids safe in this particular instance.
Yes,
So
'cause yeah,
let's
it could
go
lead to
on.
dangerous,
Yeah.
because they could swallow, an object basically, because of the oral fixation.
Yeah, I had a student one year that like he ate everything he saw. He would eat beads. And when we finally were like talking to mom about it, she's like, "Oh, he's had mini surgery. He's swallowed batteries. There's a
Wow.
lot of things." So like if that's what I'm saying, like if your kid is ingesting things, not just like licking them and experience them, or maybe just like chewing all the time or grinding teeth or those kinds of things. But if they're actually ingesting, keep an eye on it. Don't panic, but
Yes.
definitely talk to your pediatrician and be like, hey, this is happening. Pike is real, and a lot of our kids deal with it. Nothing to be ashamed of. It's just something that like we really have to be proactive about and careful with inside of our homes, inside of our clinics, in our classrooms. Let's talk about touch.
Touch is so cool. These kids love anything that they can squish between their fingers, and feel through their like fingertips, even sometimes like rubbing it on their face. So like a lot of kids that I know would carry a blanket and then just be holding that blanket throughout their day or their session that they were in. In addition to, it could include like fecal smearing. So there was a lot of instances where kids on the spectrum would defecate and then they would like smear it through their fingers and smear it on their walls and things like that. In addition to like water was a big thing, as far as, and it still is, where they would play and engage in water, or they would be just a whole different kid when they were in the swimming pool. So that feeling and sensation, through your like touch with your fingers and your body is, hyper
Yeah.
aware.
I back to those clients. We have some of the best clients ever, but I have a
Yeah.
client that every time that he comes up to me, he'll rub his mouth on my arm. Right? He's not like trying to lick me or trying to kiss me or anything. He's just like, it's that feel of touch, right? Like he just is like
Mm,
wanting, that's
yes.
how he processes the world, right? Around him. Like, or if he's playing with something, he might rub it up on his face or rub it on his mouth or something so that he can feel whatever it is, the Play-Doh or whatever. But especially on his cheeks, when we're painting, he might stick his fingers in and give himself some blush. So,
Yes.
touch is really cool. And sometimes I'm jealous. I'm like, I wish I could experience what you're experiencing. I wish that I was like so invigorated by the sensation of touch. I guess we all are to some degree,
Yes.
but for our kids on the spectrum, they're just like really heightened. And our last one
Right.
is smell.
Yes. So these are, children who seek out different kinds of smells, whether they're perfumes, a lot of hand sanitizer, a lot of those like plugins, and in addition to like smelling people. So they have obsession with some sort of thing that smells great to them, I guess. And so they sit and smell over and over and over again. Like I had a kid one time where he would lick something. So not only did he have the sensory for the mouth or the oral, but he would smell it right after. and he would sniff and sniff like the lingering saliva that was on the object.
That's super interesting. Man,
Yeah.
I always wonder, like, what does it feel like for them to go into Bath and Body Works? Like,
Overload.
whoa.
One of my clients' reinforcements was going to Lush, which was like a soap
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, the
And
soap store.
yeah, and I mean, we would go around the store because it was shaped like a horseshoe. And it was like we would spend 30 minutes just going through the exact same thing over and over and over again. And she would sit there and smell it, put it down, go to the next thing, sit there and smell it, and then put it down. So it's just so interesting how their brains work in regards to like how it makes them feel good as far as like reinforcement goes, you know? And
Yeah.
she would buy all those soaps. Her parents would be okay with buying all the soaps, but she never utilized it. What she utilized it for was to smell it. Yeah.
I'm like, I feel like she used it, not in the way that you and I would use
Right,
it, right?
right.
Just like play often doesn't look like how you and I think play should look like, right? She used it.
Yeah,
She just, it lasted a lot longer for her.
right.
I love it. So that's sensory. Let's go on to escape. I
Yes.
think escape is probably the one that like makes me giggle the most. I have this amazing client, and the other day, another client came up to him and was like, "Hey, how old are you?" And he was like, "I don't know, go ask my mom." Right? Like his mom's not even there. Nobody can ask mom, right? But that was like he was trying to escape that conversation with a peer, right? So for
That
us,
social interaction.
yeah, and it just always makes me giggle because I'm like, the need to escape sometimes like outweighs the reality of what's going on right now, right?
Yes.
So let's talk about what you would do about that, right? So if you
Yeah.
have a child, a student that is like trying to escape situations,
Or even
or
an adult in the spectrum.
an adult, you have a really great, you want to share your story because I just love it so
Yes.
much.
So I
Go ahead.
attended a job fair and there was an adult there who had a job coach with him and he was seeking employment in IT. And a lot of the vendors there or the people that were hiring were not necessarily seeking IT. And he came up to a hotel booth that was going to open up in downtown. And he was like, "Oh, I'm interested in an IT position." And the guy goes, "Well, we're not really hiring for IT positions. We're a hotel that's being brought up. And these are our positions that are open." And before he could even begin talking about those, this adult man said, "Not interested," and walked away. And so that was an instance of escape. I think already he was going in with that level of anxiety and that level of uncomfortability to have those social interactions. Like I recognize that the job coach was talking to him about eye contact, about introducing himself to like those simple social interactions really cause our friends like discomfort basically in their skin, right? In regards to just being able to communicate with these people.
Yeah, and on that subject, for a lot of our friends, what is socially acceptable or socially normal is to make eye contact, to hold a
Right.
conversation, right? Some of our friends, that's very difficult for them. I was watching the other day a podcast with someone who is on the spectrum, and he's an adult, and he was talking about growing up, people would get really upset if he wasn't able to like make eye contact, but when he was making eye contact, he couldn't concentrate. It was like his all he could think about was like, I'm staring into their soul, right?
Yeah.
And he really has struggled with that his whole life. So for a lot of our friends, whenever we start to have these conversations, just a simple conversation of your peer walking up and saying, hey, how old are you? And making that eye contact with you and kind of forcing you into a situation that you weren't ready for and you hadn't prepared for that, that can be really difficult for them. So let's talk about like what we would do. There's a couple approaches. And depending on if you're the parent, if you're in an ABA setting, if you're in a classroom, it's going to look a little bit different. So let's go back to my friend that was asked how old they were, and their response was, I don't know, go ask my mom, right? So in that situation, that response was an automated response, right? To kind of make the other friend be like, oh, okay, right? And in a general situation, in a classroom situation, that friend might turn around and leave, right? However, we want to work through that situation, right? Because if I can't tell somebody how old I am now, then I'm going to struggle with things like a job fair later, right? So in that situation, the response from myself was, oh, we're going to go ahead and answer. Let's think about it. How old are you? They gave me the answer, right? All right, now tell your friend. So he turned around and said, you know, I'm such and such. And they were able to work through that conversation. As a parent, that would be a great direction to go also, right? Go ahead
That would
and
be
follow through.
considered follow through. So like if that
Yeah.
response would be recognized as like the third party in the situation, following through with the instructions from the peer to the other, to your specific client or to your son or daughter. That is one level of what we call replacement behavior. You're going to jump into a second part. I know. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, in my practice, we would always try to identify replacement behaviors based on the function. So, like, that wasn't really an appropriate way to terminate a conversation between two clients or two people on the spectrum. And so I would have probably coached and said, hey, maybe you should say, hey, I'm not really interested in talking right now. So maybe you can come back later, or just a way and a more polite way to excuse yourself from something that you're not necessarily interested in.
Yeah.
So we would
So,
coach functional communication in that instance.
and we have to be careful with that too, right?
Yes.
Because if we overdo, I'm not really interested, what happens? We get our friend from the job fair, right? So if
Yeah.
we're always pointing towards not interested or unavailable right now, whatever that may be,
No, thank
right?
you.
Yeah, no thanks. Sorry. Right? I hear sorry a lot. That's a really big automated response for a lot of my friends. Oh, sorry. And then they turn around and leave, right?
Yeah.
So we
Let's
have
talk
to
about
be,
automated responses real fast, because
yeah, go
you brought
ahead.
it up now twice. And I think that for our viewers, I think it's really important that automated response is more like a conditioned response, meaning that they were taught this. And so they're conditioned to, when they encounter situations like this, like social uncomfortability, they instantly go in and they say those like phrases that they have learned through therapy or their parent or at school.
And
Okay.
those automated responses can be really hard because sometimes we teach them and don't even realize that we're teaching them.
Right.
And then all of
Yeah.
a sudden they start saying them and you're like, oh, oops. Mm. We have
Yes.
to reshape this, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
what would be if we were talking about our friend at the job fair? What would be a way that you could coach them through it? Um, that would be different, right? You don't have to stay and listen. You and I wouldn't stay and listen to the whole spiel if we're not interested, right? But we might
Yeah.
have a different response than not interested and turn around, right?
Right.
So, how could you coach them through that?
Yes. So I would probably have them return back to the setting and say, thank you for offering me these positions. But like I had said, I'm looking for an IT position, but I will check your website if those are ever become available on the administrative side. Just something in regards to being polite in regard and escaping in a more polite manner. I
Yeah.
think a lot of the workforce today, we have to remind ourselves, right? So a lot of the workforce today is all about culture and like how do we keep a positive working culture? And so when they come in and they're saying, I'm not interested in the way it was so abrupt, most people are going to take a look at that and go, well, they're probably not a right fit because they're instantly dismissive. And I think it's just a misunderstanding between both parties. And so what they need to be doing is really working on teaching those skills.
Yeah. I more than agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
Let's move on to attention. We did sensory, escape, and now attention.
Yes. Yes. Okay. I have a great story for this.
Please share. Please share.
So I had a client who recently discovered his vocal language and his parents would curse at home. And so and he noticed that if he used the OSHIT phrase that he would get people to laugh. Well, it would be all the time, every single time that he would come in, it was, oh, shh. And, you know, when a 3-year-old is saying it and then you're cute, most people will react and be like, that is not something you should say, and then start giggling. Well, he enjoyed the giggling and it would happen often. Well, then people were getting to the point where like now it's no longer cute and they're getting tired of it, but they made the initial mistake of providing that attention to them. So now we have to undo that by providing no reaction whatsoever in order for them to stop engaging in that inappropriate attention behavior.
Yeah, we talk about this a lot. Attention is your least favorite. Attention is my most favorite. I
Ugh.
just, kids are so funny. They do some of the funniest things, but that response, right? The way that we handle the situation is so important. And I oftentimes will speak with either new teachers or new therapists, and they'll be like, you just don't do anything, like you're just not going to make a face, you're not even going to acknowledge that they said that or did that or whatever, you're just going to act like it's not happening. And that's very foreign to us. We often in our culture feel like there's a response for everything, right? So I have to
Yeah.
answer, I have to tell you, no, we're not doing that, or that's inappropriate, or whatever it may be, right? But when it comes to attention seeking behaviors, and this is, I mean, it's not just our friends on the spectrum, right? We've seen, you know, neurotypical kids on Facebook, on your little reels, cursing, saying the funniest things, right? And they're hilarious. Like they do some of the funniest stuff. But
Hold on, sorry. A common way of recognizing attention seeking behavior is, have you ever gotten on the phone and your kids are constantly asking for something while you're on the phone?
right,
So I have best friends with children, and it's funny because they'll say, they weren't bothering me 30 minutes ago when I wasn't on the phone with you. And now I'm locked up in the laundry room so that they can't find me so I can have an adult conversation with you. And I feel like it's so common. It's like, Mom, can I have Cheetos? Mom, can I have a fig bar? Mom, can you make me a quesadilla? Mom, where's my shoes? Mom, can we go outside? And I'm like, dude, you want to call me back?
right? Or it's my son popping his head up over the headrest. Hey,
Yeah.
right? Every 5 seconds. Because he's looking for attention, right? Like
Right.
he
Yeah.
doesn't even want anything. He's just like right here. Hey,
Yes.
hey, Kim, hey, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
It's
a common way
attention,
to relate to attention, with like even just neurotypical kids or just children in general, you know?
or people in general. I mean, I know
Ugh.
adults that engage in attention seeking behavior every day at their job. So,
Yeah. Yes.
you know, like attention seeking behavior it's a natural thing, really. And we all desire to be seen, heard, loved, and understood, right? So
Yeah,
a lot of
definitely.
times when I have a client or student that is engaging in that attention seeking behavior, that's what I'm trying to remind myself. We all want to be seen. We all want to be loved. We all want to be understood. So how can I, once I move past this, how can I give you some attention in an appropriate way? Right?
Yeah.
That is,
So
go ahead.
I would totally jump in regards to that, like seeking the positive attention or reinforcing the positive attention. So I always tell parents or even clinicians, we need to be praising them when they're engaging in the socially appropriate behavior. So, like when
Absolutely.
they're having that conversation with other people that's appropriate and not about poop or whatever it is that is negative. And just to remind people, like having those poopy conversations is age typical. Like, I mean, I have nephews, and every single year they ask for fart spray as a birthday present. And then,
Of course they do.
yeah. So it's socially appropriate, but as adults, you're like, come on, be mature. And it's not. You can't tell them that. But as far as reinforcement goes, you want to reinforce them with when they're engaging in that appropriate attention seeking behavior, and then also teaching them ways to gain attention in a manner that isn't disrespectful, that isn't inappropriate, that isn't offensive either. So those three components are huge, and you don't want to give those three components so much attention, but you want to guide them to ways that they can gain attention more appropriately.
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I used to teach in my classroom, really like at the very beginning, before we really started teaching anything, was what I like to call tap, look, and ask, right?
Yeah.
So instead of being like, teacher, 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 right? Like, calm down, right? I do want to hear what you have to say. What you say is important. So you can tap me on the shoulder. And when I look at you, you know that I'm paying attention. Then you can talk to me. I might not look at you right away. I might have to hold my finger up and you might have to wait just a second, right? Or I
Yeah.
might have to finish my conversation with my friend. But when I'm done, hold it in your head and you can tell me exactly what it is that you're wanting to say. It's important to me and I want to hear it. Um,
Right.
in the clinic, it looks a little bit different, right? That's a lot of words for someone who isn't interested in hearing a lot of words, right? So in the clinic, we can still teach tap and look and
Yeah.
ask. I think
Yeah.
we did a tap, look, and ask with a client before. But it also looks like whenever they're done with that behavior, let's say we're just like making poop jokes, poop jokes, poop jokes. As soon as they're done with that, as soon as they
Yes.
step into the next thing of whatever it may be, writing something down, speaking positively of a friend, I'm going to acknowledge it the second, not delayed because I'm agitated with the behavior, the second it happens. And that will
Right.
reinforce, oh, they like that. I'm going to do that more and do the
Yeah.
thing they weren't talking to me about less. So
Yes.
the
Yes.
very last one is tangible access to tangible items, or
Yes.
places. I had a student years and years ago. God bless her soul. I loved her so much. But when it was time for us to clean up for center time, it was when I was teaching. She would just start screaming, destroying my classroom. I mean, just knocking over shelves, throwing toys, flipping tables, throwing chairs across the room. What would happen would be that I would have to, one of the teachers would take the rest of the class outside of the classroom and we would stay in there with her. We would push that little button on our wall. I know a lot of teachers will relate to this because it happens a lot in the classroom. Push that little button on the wall. The counselor or the principal would come down and hang out with myself or the other teacher that was in the classroom, and we would wait her out, right? So, what was happening in that situation is we were asking her to be done with what she wanted to do, right? And that's hard. A lot of our kids, we see this at home. It's time for us to go, right? And oh, no more tablet. And all of a sudden they're screaming, they won't put their shoes on. No, we're not doing that, right? So she was seeking access to the tangible items within the classroom. And that can be really difficult. Kim and I had this conversation last night. This is probably the one I get wrong the most, because I'm like, oh, they're trying to escape because they don't want to go on to the next thing or whatever, when in reality, they just want that thing that they were playing with right now. So
Yeah, it's very common to like recognize it as escape.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause in my mind, right, in that situation, I'm like, well, she just doesn't want to do the next thing that we're doing. Right. But
Right.
whenever we're looking at behavior, I would say the very most important thing looking at behavior is that we're not deciding for someone else what they're thinking or what they want or
Yes.
don't want. Right.
Yeah.
So we
Key.
call it the dead man's test. Right. I am only going to decide and figure out what's going on here with things I can actually see.
Yeah.
So in that moment, what am I actually seeing? The timer went off. She started throwing things. What does that tell me? That tells me she was still playing with that, right? She
Right.
doesn't want to move on. She still is holding on to that thing to continue with. So there's a couple
And this
things
is
that
so
we can.
common in the field, like having access. So just reminding ourselves that they started with something that was preferred, and now you're presenting something that is so not preferred. And how do you tell somebody, okay, that's enough? Like it would be like you taking away my cinnamon roll and going, okay, you only get one bite. Oh, I'm gonna come for
Excuse
you.
me. I will claw your eyes out for that cinnamon roll. Give it
Yeah.
back. Yeah. So the thing with access is the way that we respond to the access to tangible is actually going to look different within the classroom, within a clinic setting, and then at home, right? Because the reality of them gaining the access looks different in each environment. So in the classroom setting,
Yeah.
for that student, what I ended up doing and what I would still do is I got her a timer, right? So at 5 minutes before it was time for the cleanup song to come on, I would go over and say, hey, we have 5 minutes. When this timer goes off, we're going to be all done, right? And then in addition to that, whenever the timer went off, and I had like a classroom timer that was on the board so the whole class could see it. It wasn't like a secret special thing for her. It was just like the whole class knew what the timer was doing. When the
Yeah.
timer went off, I gave an additional 5 minutes of flex time for her to put up the things, because a lot of times like the putting up part, especially when you're in my classroom was two adults to 20 kids, I needed more space and time to like get everybody going in the right direction, right? So in that instance, I gave myself and the entire class and her an additional 5 minutes to kind of like flex into that time. In the clinic, it would look somewhat similar. Kim, do you want to talk about like what your procedure would be for the clinic?
Yes. So again, I would always include communication. So if they weren't ready to transition, we would have them ask for additional time. So like, can I have 1 more minute? Can I have 5 more minutes? And then I would also add a reinforcement. So if they were able to successfully transition, they would get some sort of secondary reinforcement. Like, okay, since you transitioned without having an explosive tantrum where the property destruction was involved, like the next time they were given like additional minutes to play the activity that they were seeking. And so that's like a huge part of your replacement behavior procedure in regards to teaching these kids, because access is so hard to combat. It's something that's very similar to like automatic. It makes them feel good. So when they're playing video games or they're watching their tablet and you immediately take it away from them, or you transition from something to a less preferred task, they're instantly going to react in like a Hulk manner because that specific activity made them feel so good.
Yeah. I had a friend at church. I serve at our church, and he is a friend that's on the spectrum, and we have video games inside of our area, and he was playing the Nintendo Switch, and we came over the microphone and said, "Hey, it's time for us to start cleaning up." Another friend came up and said, "Hey, it's time for us to sit down." And he just stood up and punched that kid right in the face, right? Like, he was not ready to transition, right? So it's important that the way that we present the transition is appropriate for them. And that is what gets us into the home setting. So let's talk about home, because with all of these, with recognizing what the function of behavior is, there's also something that happens before that can help the situation or hurt the situation, right? No matter what the function of behavior is. So when we're talking about access to tangibles at home, let's talk about, as an example, just you're driving home from somewhere and your kid wants Chick-fil-A fries, right? You're driving past the
Mhm.
Chick-fil-A, they want fries. You have a different plan in mind. Sometimes in life, especially, it's harder in the home, right? In the clinic, we have a controlled environment, but when you leave the home, the environment is a lot less controlled, right? Or leave the clinic. So sometimes we can give you that. Sometimes we can stop at Chick-fil-A and sometimes we can get fries, right? But sometimes it's unavailable. So let's give some helpful advice to parents in that situation. I feel like every parent I know deals with this. I want McDonald's. I want McDonald's. I want McDonald's, right? So how does my response, how can my response help this situation? What should I do?
I would set up a schedule. So some of these, like what you were talking about as far as like antecedents go, and letting them know like first this, then this, or we don't have that available. So like letting them know prior to leaving the house or getting into the car. And what we call that is priming, right? Like, sorry, buddy, we're not going to McDonald's today because I already know you're about to ask. And so I just want to let you know that that is not available. And then in addition to like letting them know when. So a lot of these kids or our friends don't ever ask when questions. And I think asking that when question and letting them know when it is available will help ease their mind in regards to gaining access to it.
Yeah. So I could say to my kid, like, I know you really want Chick-fil-A today. I'm sorry, buddy, it's unavailable, but we can go whatever, Saturday. We can,
Yes.
like, whatever that time is frame is for you, you can, and then that's something that's a reinforcement for them to look forward to, right?
Right.
Now I have something that I can look forward to, like, oh, I can't have it right now. And when you first start this, let's be very clear. It's not just going to be like, oh, okay, right? They have to actually get the reinforcement a couple times before you gain their trust of, yes, it's actually going to happen. So that's
Yes.
why I say we talked about this in attention, immediate reinforcement, right? So when I'm first teaching this to a client, I'm going to give them a whatever first bathroom, then snack, right? And the second we come out of that bathroom, I got that snack and we got it opened up, right? Like,
Right.
we're ready. They, just like you and I, trust is built, right? I have to
Yes.
trust that your yes is yes and your no is no, and that you're not going to flake out on me, right? And I think for us, I don't really care who it is, whether it's you and I, any relationship, trust is a built thing and it can be taken away very quickly. So it's important that we follow through with our friends. I get this question a lot. in regards to my relationships with my clients. How come they listen? Well, they listen because I follow through, right? They listen because they know if I say, first, we're going to do this worksheet and then we can play basketball, that I for sure mean, then we will play basketball, right? I've proven to them that I am trustworthy and that my yes is yes and my no is no. So when we're looking at our kids for functions of behavior, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's a client, whether it's our own child, what we do after we discover that function of behavior is just as important as recognizing as what's going on. Probably more important, because it's going to build the trust for us to be able to shape the behavior later.
Right, right. Yeah, it's so important. I had a lot of parents who would make those promises and then forget to follow through, right? Or I would have the
Guilty.
parents, yeah, who would make the
Guilty.
promise and follow through with a contingency. So I would always tell them, like, don't add anything, because now you're creating other parts of the behavior, as opposed to just telling them, hey, on Friday after therapy, we'll go to Chick-fil-a and grab those fries for you. But then it would turn into, well, you had to clean your room and you had to do this and you had to turn in your homework on time and you were supposed to have a good report after school or therapy or whatever it was. And so then now you've put too many response effort, is what I would like to say, in order to get the fries. So you've increased the way of accessing it, and then it becomes not worth it to the kids, right? As opposed to reinforcing their communication to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that can be very confusing. We'll have to talk about that on another podcast, because reinforcement versus bribing is very hard to understand
Yes.
and to put into place. I remember when I very first started in with special education, and they started like explaining reinforcement. I'm like, so you're bribing the kids? And they're like, no, this is totally different. The verbiage, the way we carry it out, right, is different. And you have to kind of change a little bit of your thought process and learn a little bit of that. So we're definitely going to have to do a podcast on reinforcements and types of reinforcements and what that will look like. We hope that this helped you guys a little bit. Functions of behavior can be very difficult, but as we continue on the podcast, we will be referring back to this podcast a lot. So we hope this
Yes.
helps. We hope that if you have any questions, maybe you'll shout them out and we can answer them in future podcasts. We hope you have a great day. Thank you for
Thank you
joining
for
us.
joining us. Yeah.
We'll see you guys later.